All right, good morning.
Hey Gina, thanks for joining me and talking with us a little bit about it, about grief and loss and bereavement, and just spending some time together. I really appreciate you and your expertise and your willingness to join us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so we've got some questions for you, and then maybe you can just share a couple of thoughts about each of them, and we'll get this recorded and sent out to folks. What would you want, and what would you want teens to know about grief and loss in general?
Well, I think just that idea that grief is really messy. And anytime we lose something or someone that's important to us, we're going to have all kinds of really natural reactions. And some of those are physical and some of those are emotional. And we can talk a little more about some things that can help in a minute. But I think that piece of knowing that it's really common that at times we might feel like we just want to avoid thinking about the loss, and other times we just can't think about anything else. And grief comes in waves, and that's really natural. And it lasts longer than anybody imagines that, it's ever going to. We start out mostly feeling numb or a sense of shock. And then for most people, it actually tends to get worse before it gets better as that numbness wears off. And we start to, kind of add up the ways that this loss is impacting us. And then this process of adjusting is for the rest of our lives. I was in middle school when my dad died by suicide, and that was a long time ago. And there are still times in my life today as an adult where things get stirred up again, and there's just new opportunities for healing and tending to that pain. And so
Sure.
I encourage people to think of it like a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Why wouldn't we want somebody who's important to us to be with us, in some way, and still have thoughts and feelings and memories, and have that person still be part of our life? Then of course, grief might just always kind of be there too.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think especially when a death is traumatic or a loss is traumatic, there can be times where maybe we want to remember the person, but we don't want to think about how they died or, think about that traumatic event. And that's really natural too. That's not being, disloyal to the person who died. And I think another thing that surprises people is maybe we expect to feel sad when we experience a loss, but I will say what brings people into my office more often for grief counseling is irritability, just a sense of frustration or feelings of guilt, the woulda, coulda, shoulda. This is not the way I thought my life was supposed to be kind of feeling.
Mhm.
Sometimes those feelings of powerlessness can come out sideways. So that's important to know too.
Yeah.
And it can affect us physically. Sometimes people have a hard time sleeping or headaches or stomach aches. And it can affect our concentration. My experience, I remember being particularly challenged in my math classes, like just information wasn't sticking because of, my brain on grief. It was really hard to learn new things for a while. And so I think it's helpful to know that that's really common. And if you're experiencing that, to ask for more help, whether that's tutoring or extra time, because that is a really common way that grief affects our ability to think, and we're just more distracted and not tracking as well.
Sure. So if we aren't tracking as well, we're distracted, we're feeling more irritable or sad. Um, what do some teens find helpful?
Yeah. So I think this idea of just um, being able to process it a little bit at a time. And so, whether that is with a trusted adult in your family, whether it's with someone at school, a teacher or a counselor or a coach, or, a grief counselor like myself, maybe it's a support group, but being able to a little bit at a time, recognize what is normal and expected wherever you're at, and also to get some tools for your toolbox. So, there's like regulation strategies like belly breathing or calm, safe place that can help us, fall back asleep if we're having nightmares, or, there's other tools. And also, there's something about connecting with other people and being able to share stories, like you talked about, of having rituals to honor the person who died can really help us have a sense of learning to love them in a new way, or have a new relationship with the person who died. And that can be difficult to sort out all by ourselves. And so having other people that are maybe farther down the line in their own group that have, or in their own experience, that can offer up some of those tools, and just, to be listened to is a wonderful thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some great ideas. And makes me think that you don't have to be, an expert to be helpful too. And that, I would guess that a lot of, people in general and teens are supporting each other and helping friends and family. What would you want to share with teens about supporting each other and friends and family in the middle of grief?
Yeah. I have I get a lot of feedback from teens as well as adults about what's helpful and what isn't. And I would say the thing that most people find helpful is just if you can just settle yourself and be quiet and listen and not make it about you. That's really important, to suspend any judgment that you might have about, sometimes people will say unhelpful things like, oh, I had no idea it was still so hard, or, something like that, that kind of, gives this sense of what the timeline should be about grief, and that's not so helpful. And so listening, I would say, being able to not offer um, not offer pity. So people appreciate empathy, they appreciate sympathy, but that's a different thing than us believing that we know how somebody else should be grieving. And so I think when we can see people as resilient and really notice the things that they're doing to adapt, and also offer help in practical ways, whether it's offering to pick up homework for someone, or would you like me to come to that meeting, or offering just to hang out and do normal things. And don't be offended at the person's just so exhausted in their grief that they don't have energy maybe to be in a big group of people, but
Mhm.
maybe really appreciate hanging out one on one and just watching a movie. So I think
Yeah.
meeting people where they're at is really important.
Yeah, I think so too. How do folks know if maybe they need some more help, or if someone, a friend or family member, someone they care about, needs some more help? What are folks? What should we be looking for?
Right. So, how we talked about that grief can affect us emotionally as well as physically, or our ability to function at work or school, or at home. And I think whenever those reactions are really intense, like people are having really intense anxiety or really intense depressed feelings, maybe thinking about hurting themselves, or maybe they're using alcohol or other drugs to numb out, then it's a good idea to connect with some kind of professional support, or at least touch base with someone, and better to have a conversation and find out that your grief is completely normal, and you don't
Yeah.
need counseling, than to be hanging on by your fingernails. And so if you're concerned about somebody else or concerned about yourself, I think, and also when those trauma or grief reactions continue on in a way that continue to be impacting. So maybe it's still, maybe it's not severe depression, but it's moderately withdrawing from your friends and family. some kind of support group or counseling might still really make a positive difference. You don't have to be in crisis to benefit from extra help. And for sure, if you're worried about, someone being in a crisis, you want to get help right away. You want to talk to an adult that can help you, whether that's a crisis text line or a trusted adult, because you don't want to have the woulda, coulda, shouldas that you kept a secret if somebody's really in a crisis.
Sure. And crisis text line, text MN to 741-741. Is that?
That sounds like a great option.
Yep. And then there's Essentia Grief and Loss phone number. What's that one?
Yep. That's 218-786-4402.
Yep. And then, in an emergency, you can always call the police too, right?
Yep. Absolutely. 911, you can always just ask for a safety check. They can check in with somebody and just make sure that they're okay. Absolutely.
Excellent ideas. And then Birch Tree offers a crisis service as well. All right. Last question is, sometimes it feels like, gosh, nothing's working, or I just don't believe anything's going to work. What would you want to share with folks about feeling like nothing's working, or just kind of believing that nothing's going to help?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that, because I think that is such a normal response in grief, that, to feel like that sense of hopelessness, like life's never going to go back to the way it was before. And I think, when we can reach out for the right kind of help, if the first person that you talk with isn't helpful, you make a second connection. If the second person isn't helpful, make a third. And I can say I've experienced that personally, when I've experienced the deaths of family members. Not everybody's trauma informed, not everybody, is a grief expert. And so I would say persistence and perseverance really goes a long way, and reminding ourselves, we didn't have control over the event that happened. We didn't have control, particularly, if it's something like an overdose or suicide. We might have those woulda, coulda, shouldas and want to go back in time, and that's really normal. And at the same time, to be able to focus on what do I have control over right now. And through counseling and therapy, there are ways of making living amends. There are ways of working through our regrets that can be really healing. I mentioned I came to this work after the death of a parent by suicide when I was in middle school. And I can honestly share that things didn't really get markedly better until I was a bit into my adulthood. My teen years were pretty rough. And I share that not because that's going to be that way for everybody, but for me, I had to try some things that didn't work before I found some things that did work. And so I think that's part of the benefit of connecting with other people that get it and can be supportive and encouraging where you're trying things on for size. And I wouldn't be doing my work for 27 years if I didn't see most people get better. And so I'm very hopeful with the right kind of support. There is reason to believe that you can find a new kind of relationship with the person who died, and new tools for your toolbox. But it's a long haul, and hang in there.
Hey, really appreciate you sharing some information with us, as well as just just being a person that we can connect with and really believe in and appreciate a great deal.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thanks for talking to